I'm here at the scene of the crime spree, right behind me.
Strange. Vice Mayor Strange, you'll address her properly.
You can kiss my foot.
Mr. Rickard, you're out of order.
FBI, we are asking you to investigate this council. Please look into this council, how they award contracts, the bid process, how they use their positions to benefit their friends and themselves, how they use their positions to attack residents and critics and neighbors and business competition. FBI, will you please look into this?
And I welcome the FBI here. If you notice, Mr. Thompson, with his plea for the FBI and his watchdog group, this city runs the cleanest in this whole county. I guarantee
He was served a federal subpoena this morning.
Did receive a subpoena this morning, and we're going to cooperate 100% with the subpoena.
And most of you who were involved up here, you gaslighted me. You tried to say I was crazy. And now we know that that's not true. And there's a lot of other issues I've been asking about as well.
All right, so the government, the prosecutors, the federal prosecutors, have given their reply to defendant James Finch's renewed motion for acquittal, meaning there's not under Federal Rule 29, when the court deems there is not enough evidence for a conviction, they are duty bound. The court is to acquit the defendant. And that's the case that James Finch is making for reasons that I've explained, especially over the past few days, right? So yesterday was the deadline, the extended deadline for the prosecutors to respond to that so the judge can look at both sides and make his decision. The deadline was midnight last night. And as per usual, they did it, I guess, submitted it last night. But you're going to see it today. So you've seen what I've said. And you know that I was in the trial and I've seen all the evidence and I've shown you a bunch. And so I certainly don't think there's enough evidence to convict. I don't think he did it at all. It was his money and 5-0 vote and all that, the timeline, all that stuff. But the government still says, the prosecutors, the feds still say, no, damn it, he did it. He wrote a $5,000 check in 2017. And he absolutely intended to bribe Antonius Barnes. And this deserves the weight of the U.S. government to put him away for life. You'll see. But there's something else I want to show you first. At the end of the show yesterday, I told you again that Panama City Beach wants to dig a 30-foot deep trench into the Gulf of Mexico under the water next to the pier, the city pier, by Pier Park. And they want to discharge filthy stormwater into the Gulf. Now, this all started about 2 years ago, when they found out they could get some grant money if they just would lie to the government and say that Pier Park is a blighted area and they need HUD money. And so they did. They got away with it. They got $21 million. They said this project to discharge filthy stormwater into the Gulf of Mexico, under the ground, and then up, right by the end of Pier Park, the pier. They said it'd be about $17 million. And I said, I bet it's going to be more than that. You won't believe how much. You won't believe how much it is now for them to do this. Now, why are they doing it? They say that it will help reduce flooding. It won't. They're bringing the water from north of Back Beach Road to dry up the swampland so St. Joe can develop. They're bringing that water that normally absorbs in the soil, and they're going to discharge it into the Gulf of Mexico next to the end of the pier. And well, anyway, what am I talking? Let me show you what I said at the meeting today, and then we'll get to the Finch stuff, because I think you're gonna. This impacts us. This is a super big deal. And yesterday they had an information meeting where they had all the experts there, and well, this is what I had to say. A couple years ago, when you introduced this project and you sold us all the selling points, you said it was going to cost $17 million a couple years ago. And then you got a grant, a HUD grant, by the way. You had to lie to the government and say that Pier Park was a blighted area in order to get this HUD grant for $21 million. Wow, it's already $21 million. Have you told the community it's $41 million now?
Currently, the city council has $31 million dedicated for this project and grant money, but it's going to cost at least $41 million. And it seems like every day it's going up more and more.
$41 million? I remember when this happened, I said, I'll bet you it's going to be $30 million. And Councilman Jarman, you like to say Bernie Thompson misinformation. I undershot that. $41 million at this point, it'll be more than 50. 60? What are the kickbacks, honestly? The land deals, Mr. Mayor. What are you guys getting out of this? You know what the biggest takeaway, Mr. Jarman, I wish you would talk about this. The biggest takeaway about the drilling and stormwater discharge project that you all are up to, when you're going to drill 30-foot deep trenches, at least one, just a quarter mile west of the pier, and discharge polluted stormwater into the Gulf. Here was the biggest takeaway from last night with the experts who were there. Bernie, it's going to be treated. The discharged stormwater that we're bringing from north of Back Beach Road and putting in the Gulf, it's going to be treated. It's going to be treated. Really, and so the question was to the experts, how is it going to be treated? How are you going to get rid of the bacteria and the oil and the pollution? And you know this answer, Councilman Jarman, but you're not saying it. There is no treatment. There's a screen, a series of screens to stop the debris and the sediment. Mr. Jarman, this is true. And if you want to shake your head, you and I can have a debate on your terms about this, and we'll see who's telling the truth. I'd love to do that. You're a smart guy, and it'll be a civil debate. But this is unbelievable. $41 million now, and there is no treatment. There is a screen to stop the debris. This is outrageous. Thank you. Yeah, the shadow knows. I bet it gets up to $60 million. These people are insane. As I've said, and I borrowed this from somebody, John said this. They would discharge arsenic in the Gulf if the kickbacks were big enough. I mean, that's the kind of maniacs we're talking about here. And they want to put 20 of these across the beach. They want to dig up the rock bed under the water in Panama City Beach to put pipes big enough to drive cars through, to discharge stormwater from north of Back Beach Road to dry up the wetlands so St. Joe can develop. And they had to lie about it to get the first $21 million. Boy, they're banking on getting a whole bunch more grants. All right, I have to transition. And I want to share with you the answer, the government's answer to James Finch's motion for acquittal. All right, but I'm going to do that right after this.
You want to look good? You want to feel good? Little John's Big and Tall is where it's at, right across the street from Sky's Pizza Pie, 5700 North Davis Highway. You can find out more online at littlejohnsbigandtall.com. He's also a member of the iTex trading community, where your iTex dollars are welcome.
It's a hot time in Florida, and my friend Ryan could make sure your air conditioning is running at peak efficiency. He could even install a new one, built to a higher standard, American standard. Find out more at pcairrepair.com. Okay, here it is, the government's response to defendant James Finch's motion for acquittal. So I'm going to read you most of it. I think it's probably big enough for you to see. We'll do it like this. How's that? All right. So filed yesterday. Government's response to renewed motion for judgment of acquittal. Following a mistrial, defendant James Finch filed a renewed motion for judgment of acquittal. Though the jury did not reach a verdict, remember, there's the prosecutors talking here. The evidence was sufficient to sustain a conviction on both counts. Count one is conspiracy to bribe. In other words, he and Barnes had it planned out. They devised a scheme. And count two is that James Finch actually bribed him in 2017 with a $5,000 check. Okay. There was evidence of $45,000 in payments over the course of time. And this is not one of the counts, but they're putting it in as part of the argument. There was $45,000 that James Finch says and Antonius Barnes says was loaned to him as a business loan in the form of checks and deposited into his business account. Now, dumb, inappropriate, and maybe even violate state ethics. I don't know for sure. But a federal FP, all of this? All right. So that's what that number represents. But the actual count is a $5,000 check. While the latter, the commissioner, took official action in relation to millions of dollars of city business, which benefited the defendant and his companies. Remember, this is the $5.2 million that James Finch loaned the city and was being paid back over the course of 30 years. There was direct evidence of the commissioner's solicitation of those payments. There was direct evidence of the commissioner's acceptance of those payments with intent to be influenced, has to have that. Regarding official action, there was direct evidence of the defendant's intent, Finch, to use that money to influence or reward the commissioner in relation to official action. There was abundant evidence, says the prosecution, of federal financial assistance. In other words, the reason the feds are involved is because the city of Lynn Haven got federal money, and they're saying that that federal money, since they got that federal money, and that federal money was used. So that's why the feds are involved. All right. That's why it's in their jurisdiction. Here's the background. According to the prosecutors, the grand jury returned the third superseding indictment, meaning that the prosecutors wrote 4 drafts. That's 4. A third superseding indictment is 4 drafts. This one was, by the way, their new legal theory, because they could not show a quid pro quo. So instead, they went under a new theory of liability, a new theory, which is why they had to write it 4 times. And this new theory does not need to have quid pro quo. A wink and a nod is enough under the statute 666. I'm not kidding. So they went with what they think is an easier case to prove, a wink and a nod. Even that, though, a jury couldn't find that on either count last month. One count charged defendant Finch with conspiracy to commit federal program bribery, and count 2 charged substantive federal program bribery, the $5,000 check. The jury trial began March 13th. On March 16th, the court declared a mistrial after the jury informed the court that it was deadlocked. On March 29, defendant James Finch filed a renewed motion for acquittal. The legal standard under Federal Rule of Criminal Procedures, Rule 29, I keep telling you about. On a defendant's motion, the court must enter a judgment of acquittal of any offense for which the evidence is insufficient to sustain a conviction. Under Rule 29, if the jury has failed to return a verdict, the court may enter a judgment of acquittal. The test whether, say the prosecutors, is whether viewing the case in the light most favorable to the government, could a reasonably minded jury accept the relevant evidence as adequate and sufficient to support the conclusion of a defendant's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the test that Judge Mark Walker will consider before issuing his ruling, which probably will take place, I would say, probably in about 2 weeks, because the defendants now get to respond to this. And then Judge Walker has everything to issue a ruling, whether or not he's going to acquit based on lack of evidence, or whether they're going to do this again in July. All right, but that's the test. Here's more case law. Motions for a judgment of acquittal are routinely filed but almost never granted. A defendant's burden on Rule 29 motion is best described as nearly insurmountable, says the prosecution. As explained below, defendant Finch failed to carry the exceedingly high burden to establish that he is entitled to a judgment of acquittal. The feds say, look, he wrote a $5,000 check in 2017 so that he could loan $5.2 million at 2.22% interest over 30 years to the city so that he and Margot Anderson could get rich off of it. And they need to go away for life, or at least he does. They already dropped all 64 charges against her. And you know that story, so I don't want to get into all that. Now, Your Honor, says the prosecution, here is what you need to consider. For count one, the government presented sufficient evidence of a conspiratorial agreement and corrupt intent. The wink and the nod. For count one, the government was required to prove that defendant and commissioner in some way agreed together to try to accomplish a shared and unlawful plan to violate statute 666. That's a bribery statute that does not require quid pro quo. You do this for me, I do that for you. For count two, the government was required to prove that defendant acted corruptly, that James Finch acted corruptly in giving a thing of value, $5,000 check. That's the big bribe. To the commissioner, meaning to act voluntarily, deliberately, and dishonestly to either accomplish an unlawful end or result to, or to use an unlawful method or means to accomplish an otherwise lawful end or result. Circumstantial evidence alone would be sufficient to sustain a conviction on these offenses under statute 666. Circumstantial evidence alone, and he's going away. The existence of the agreement and a defendant's participation in the conspiracy may be proven entirely from circumstantial evidence. That's case law. Likewise, no direct evidence of a quid pro quo is necessary to sustain a bribery conviction, not under this new legal theory after they went to the fourth draft. All right, they found a way to do it without quid pro. They couldn't show a quid pro quo. So they came up with their last legal theory, and that is a wink and a nod over a $5,000 check. This is what the FBI and the Justice Department are focused on in Bay County. This. Sheriff Tommy Ford says this is absolutely true. And they haven't found any crimes after Hurricane Michael with elected officials. All that $400 million in FEMA money that flowed through Bay County looks like everybody was on the up and up, says Sheriff Ford's Public Trust Unit and the FBI. Or give it time, Bernie. We know the statute of limitations are creeping up. But, you know, things like this move slow. When reviewing the sufficiency of the evidence supporting a bribery conviction, the defendant cannot rest on the incorrect assumption that the government must produce direct evidence or of a verbal or written agreement in order for this court to sustain a bribery conviction. In other words, the federal government does not have to show anything for the jury to convict, they say. The jury just has to believe a wink and a nod was enough. That is what the government is saying. Direct evidence of an agreement is unnecessary. Proof of such an agreement may rest upon inferences. How would you like How would you like to face the rest of your life in prison over a $5,000 check written in 2017 so that you could loan the city $5.2 million? And the government, your United States government, the Justice Department, U.S. Attorney Jason Cootie, I can't believe he's doing this. I've heard so many good things about him. I thought he was going to really clean up Bay County. That's what I was told for years. But instead, they are obsessed, myopically obsessed. They say we don't need evidence. Look, they're saying it right here. Direct evidence of an agreement is unnecessary. Proof of such an agreement may rest upon inferences drawn from relevant and competent circumstantial evidence. That's the wink and the nod. Could you imagine your United States government, the country you love, saying they don't need evidence that you bribed somebody? They don't have it. Inferences. The jury should convict you upon inferences. I cannot believe Sheriff Tommy Ford and the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office are doing this. You talk about being sick to your stomach about this. This is the big corruption that they said they found. After 4 years of everything they got and everything they saw. But during trial, there was also direct evidence of both the commissioner and defendant's corrupt intent, and thus their conspiratorial agreement, says the prosecution. The direct and circumstantial evidence here would have been sufficient to sustain a conviction on both counts beginning in September of 2015. They're focused pre-Hurricane Michael. How convenient is that for a lot of bigwigs in Bay County? Beginning in September 2015 and continuing until December of 2017, the commissioner solicited and received $45,000 in checks. They keep talking about that, but that's not a charge. Purportedly as business loans from the defendant. The commissioner, and by the way, they called it a business loan too in Commissioner Barnes' statement of fact. The government itself calls the money a business loan, that he did not write that business loan down. They call it a business loan. I'm just, purportedly. The commissioner began his solicitation by stating he was not coming in his role as a commissioner, which a rational juror would conclude had the opposite intent and effect to convey exactly the opposite intention. The allegedly loaned monies were never repaid. Under the circumstances, a rational juror could conclude they were never expected or intended to be repaid. Wow. Is there not room for reasonable doubt there? Could conclude. Inferences. At the same time, defendant had millions of dollars in contracts pending before the city. Defendant was actively pressing city officials to expand his contracts and to implement them in a way that maximized the work and payments to the defendant's company. You saw the videos I showed you the last 2 days where even city manager Michael White and certainly previous city manager Joel Schubert, they made the case for James Finch. The commissioners voted 5-0. Did you ever see Margo Anderson pushing for it or James Finch? No. They were saying how lucky they were to get a 2.2% loan and what great work he did and how happy they were to get it done. This does not reflect what we saw in the city meetings. This is the entire focus of the investigation into public corruption into Bay County? Are you kidding me? You saw it. Wow. Not long after the city commission, including the commissioner, had voted to borrow $6 million to fund another phase of the defendant's half-cent sales tax infrastructure contract. There was substantial. By the way, I'll make sure this document is posted where you can read it yourself. Okay, I'll do that after the show. If you want to do it now, it's at watchdogsociety.org. Go to watchdogsociety.org, and you can get this PDF. There was substantive evidence before the jury that the commissioner sought, agreed to accept, and receive the $45,000 in checks from the defendant with the intent that he would be influenced in performance of official acts, and that he understood that he was expected as a result of the payments to support projects as specific opportunities arose. What they are quoting is what the defendants say they inserted into later. They inserted into the statement of facts. Antonius Barnes has never said this. Antonius Barnes has told Judge Walker under oath on several occasions that he never did this with the intent to be bribed. The prosecutors snuck this into a document, according to defendants later. And I'll tell you, I've watched Antonius Barnes under oath tell Judge Walker he did not sell his vote. It was never with the intent to bribe. And if you know Judge Walker, you don't lie to him under oath. It's a dangerous thing to do. This is something that they've written here that has never been said by Antonius Barnes. Judge Walker saw this, all of it. Likewise, former city manager Michael White. Okay, so this is the prosecutors are now talking about their top witness, their number one witness, Michael White. Is he credible? I'm going to read to you what Michael White is, what he is saying to prove that James Finch is guilty of bribery. Michael White said so. I'm going to read this to you, but let me do this first, and then I'll finish this without any more interruptions.
When your life is on the line, hire the lawyer who lives in our community, works in our community, and worships in our community. I'm Al Saulene, your Panama City Beach lawyer. 850-215-0628.
Don't let back pain and neck pain get you down. Find relief at Brown Chiropractic Center on St. Andrews Boulevard in Panama City. Dr. Sherry Brown helps people heal naturally with chiropractic adjustments and deep tissue massage. Call 769-3777. And now the prosecutors are bringing in the big guns. Michael White, likewise, former city manager Michael White, hired in the summer of 2017, testified about a subsequent interaction he had with defendant at Sheffield Park. They're saying that when Michael White talked to James Finch after the summer of 2017, that's when Finch said he needed the votes to secure the financing. But as we showed you, all the financing was secured 6 months before this. Now, the government is going to argue that when James Finch was nice enough to allow the city to borrow another $790,000 and put it on this mortgage a year later so that they could do stormwater work around a neighborhood and an area that the now city manager would eventually buy a home. Because he did that, they're saying that that was the 17th Street ditch financing. That was because the city came and asked him, could you please fix the flooding problem in that neighborhood, in that area of Lynn Haven that was being devastated, ravaged by floods. They basically begged James to give them another $790,000 at 2.2%. And these prosecutors are saying that James Finch pressured them so that he could loan another $790,000 at 2.2% over 30 years. That's what they're saying here. Okay? Understand. Judge Mark Walker is very clear about this. The jury might not be, but they still didn't come to a conviction. They can't. Okay, so the subsequent interaction he had with the defendant, this is all based on Michael White. He doesn't remember when it was exactly, and you've got to trust him. It was not recorded. There's no evidence of it. It's just Michael White's word. The 17th Street Ditch Project was coming back before the city commission. No, it never did. The last time was in February of 2017. That was the last financing.
other than when they tacked onto it. White related to defendant that they would need, Michael White said to James Finch that they would need the votes to secure it. He's talking with James Finch at Sheffield Park, he says, which is when the commissioner's name came up, Barnes. For some reason, they're not saying his name in this. And that's the first time I've noticed that in all these other ones. James Finch, Michael White says, James Finch said he'll dance if I tell him to dance. James Finch has great affinity to Antonius Barnes and his mom that he knew 35 years ago. Explaining that the commissioner wanted to come see him, and Finch said he probably just wants me to throw more money his way. Now, does that, anybody who knows James Finch, does that sound like how he talks? Throw more money. They were $5,000 checks. Is that how bribes are done? Oh my God, this whole timeline is off. But the prosecution says this is evidence, direct evidence of the defendant's intent to influence or reward the commissioner by giving him things of value. As the government explained in closing argument, when Michael White disclosed this information to the government during his initial proffer, when the government said, look, you have pled guilty and now you got to help us get Finch. What do you know? And this is when he started saying these things. He had no way to know what the defendant had paid money to the commission unless White actually heard it from the defendant. Okay. Seeking to discredit this evidence, the prosecutors say, look, Finch is just trying to discredit Michael White. But Judge, you're smarter than that. So the prosecutors say the defendant says, James Finch says, the record evidence conclusively shows that the funding associated with the 17th Street Ditch Project was approved by the city commission well before Michael White was even hired as the Lynn Haven city manager. That is true. Citing city commission meeting minutes ending in July of 2017, defendant says as a result of the irrebuttable inconsistencies within Michael White's court, I don't know what they're talking about there, may conclude that the government elicited perjured testimony and that it was factually impossible for the conversation described by Michael White to have taken place. The record evidence does not conclusively show that, says the prosecutors. It shows the opposite. As the defendant well knows, as James Finch well knows, financing on the 17th Street Ditch Project did come back before the commission on September 12, 2018, after the meeting in the park. And then they show it. But remember what I showed you a couple days ago. This is everything I showed you recently. Look at this. This is what you saw yesterday or the day before with Michael White. This is that meeting. City manager explained and gave some background on the 17th Street Ditch Project. It was a design build project. The original contract was for $3.7 million. I showed you when they tacked on $668,000 under Joel Schubert right there. And then I showed you a couple of days ago when the city wanted to add, there it is, $790,000 to fix the flooding issues. What have I been saying? And that area is Mississippi, Colorado, and Texas streets. This was for a separate thing that the city wanted tacked on because of the low interest rate and 30-year mortgage. This was a favor Finch did for the city. Wow. And look, it was 5-0. Does that look like a bribe to you? That he needed the certainty of, well, Bernie, that's not part of this, the prosecutors will say to the jury. The prosecutors told the jury in the closing arguments, ignore that it was 5-0, ignore that everybody loved the work, ignore that he loaned the money at 2.2%, ignore all that. Ask yourself, do you think there was a wink and a nod? I wish you could have seen it. I wish you could have been there. In other words, Prosecutors say the context of defendant's statement to White was that the commissioner had received more money from the defendant around the time of voting to borrow $6 million of additional money for the defendant's half-cent contract. And the defendant wanted an expansion of his business on the 17th Street project. I don't think the prosecutors really understand what happened. And they're certainly not listening to all of the witnesses that tried to explain it to them. The question is, will Judge Walker? The government presented evidence of conspiratorial agreement and corrupt intent sufficient to sustain a conviction on counts 1 and 2. The government presented sufficient evidence of federal finance assistance. Okay, I'm not going to go through this because it's boring. All this is saying is that the reason it is a federal case is because Lynn Haven got federal money, and that's why we're here. And I don't think anybody is arguing that the FBI doesn't have jurisdiction here. The defendants aren't even necessarily, they did make an argument about it afterward, actually. But I think, to me, this is, you can read it for yourself, okay? It's just saying that Lynn Haven got federal money, and that's why we're here. Look, all that, okay, granted. I granted, all this is evidence that the federal government gave money to FEMA. But notice it's FEMA before before the hurricane. Why is the federal government, why is that the FBI and the sheriff's office, public trust unit, and the Justice Department and Homeland Security? By the way, FEMA belongs to Homeland Security. Did you know that? If you steal FEMA money, you steal from Homeland Security. Hey, Homeland, $300 or $400 million flowed through here after Hurricane Michael, and evidently it was all handled correctly. They stole from you, if anybody stole. So Homeland Security has the jurisdiction to swoop in here and do something if they ever choose to. Isn't that interesting? All right, more evidence. Yes, it's federal money. Federal money went to Lynn Haven. 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 Okay. And that's why we have it. Okay. Accordingly, this court should deny the motion. All right. So again, you can see this document at watchdogsociety.org. All right. Watchdogsociety.org. But you just saw that what the prosecutors are saying is they do not need a quid pro quo to get a conviction. They do not need even direct evidence. All they need is for a jury to believe that there could have been an inference. And then James Finch is in the slammer. That's what they're saying. And what Judge Walker is going to consider is there enough evidence for a jury to convict? And if he doesn't think so, and he's seen it all now, he even saw the prosecutor's arguments. He even saw the jury's decision. So, again, the defendants will rebut this, and that'll be next week. And then after that, Judge Walker will have everything he needs to decide whether or not they're going to retry this $5,000 check conspiracy back in 2017. $5,000 check. Or whether he's going to acquit. I can't even believe that. What a waste of time. What a waste of resources and time. And nobody's embarrassed about it. Sheriff's office is not embarrassed how much money they've spent, how many years they've spent cleaning up the town, public corruption, FEMA, kickbacks and bribes, and everything I'd heard about. No, they're solely focused on the money that James Finch loaned the city of Lynn Haven. I mean, you ever get the feeling there's something going on and you're not in on it? That's the feeling I'm getting. But anyway, all right. So now you're up to speed. All right. Watchdogsociety.org is where you can find that PDF. I do want to quickly thank, of course, there it is, the Unknown Patriot, for your support of my efforts to show you and tell you the rest of the story, I suppose, the old Paul Harvey approach. I'll show you the rest of the story. I do want to cover more of the outfall stuff, and I will soon. I got to say this. All right. I think this is a fair thing to say and necessary. At this information meeting last night about the Outfall Project, there was a reporter there from WMBB who I hadn't seen before, and there was a reporter there from WGHG. And I watched their news stories that they put together. And they were better than any of the other news stories I've seen on this. So these young reporters told both sides of the story. They spent, I would say, equal time talking to Council Member Mary Coburn, talking to people who live on Low-Water Lake. They told both sides of the story. And, you can always find ways to make something better of any job that any of us do, right? This show could have been a hell of a lot better. Those reports could have been a little better. But I got to tell you, I think that those two reporters did a pretty good job on their news stories about the Outfall Project yesterday. And I don't know their names. I hadn't seen them before. But I got to say, my first impression is, way to go. You told both sides of the story. Did you notice that? Now I got to say, before they did the story, the anchors, Tom Lewis and even Amy Hoyt, who I like. Tom Lewis and I, we get it on because we don't get along, evidently. But Amy Hoyt and I do, and I think she's a very nice person. And I think that, well, anyway, she said something that I thought was wrong yesterday. And it was kind of funny, and I'm going to make a little video and post about it. But I just want to salute the two reporters for their work on the Outfall Project story. I thought it was pretty good. I'd love to know if you thought so. I think it's important to acknowledge that. All right. I don't want to tell you how you can support the show. I mean, it'd be great if you want to support my efforts, it'd be really terrific, but I don't feel like going through the whole Patreon thing. I just don't. All right. Thank you so much for being with me. And watchdogsociety.org is where you can find the PDF if you want to read it more closely. Maybe you're probably more detail oriented than I am. You want to take a good look at all those documents that I've passed over because I'm clearly trying to hide some. You should definitely look me up. Look at all of them. And I will see you back here very soon.